Yeah, boats flipped upside down, trees down or stripped bare, roofs missing, windows and walls of buildings destroyed, and it was definitely, without doubt, within seconds, evident to me that this was the worst affected location I'd ever been to in disaster response.
What does it take to fly a helicopter into a war zone and then walk away intact? Turns out Charlie Peshard, he's got that covered. But it was what came after, leading 40 volunteers into the wreckage of a Category 5 hurricane with no accommodation, no food and no plan, that meant he reached a common leadership edge, which he has since leaned even further into. Before I introduce Charlie, I want to tell you something about why this conversation is personal to me. I met Charlie during a period of my life where I'd just finished working as a marketing consultant for a youth programme that saw young people go out into the volunteering community and give back and create social action. I'd been filming these kids doing their social action projects, and I was starting to think, what could be a social impact project of my own? I really wanted to give back and get my hands into my own thing. I didn't have an answer yet, but I was in the season of saying yes. In walks Charlie. Do you want to come to a talk? And I was like, how to launch a social enterprise overseas? Don't mind if I do. Within 3 months, I'd then gone to Kenya to volunteer for a social enterprise, working with some incredible entrepreneurs at the grassroots. But had I gone in the other direction, which was to go to Sierra Leone with Street Child, with a different senior officer in the military, I might have walked into a disaster zone because I would have been at the epicenter of the Ebola outbreak in 2014. But that trip to Kenya completely changed the course of my life. And when I started Social Starters, we were deploying professionals to different developing countries and running volunteer programs, having never done that before, personally myself. And so there were a lot of risks inherent in that project. And things started to happen that were actually quite hairy for us as professionals, really, making it a little bit up as we were going along. And so that's when Charlie again became so paramount to our venture, because he was able to help us create psychological safety as well as physical safety to our participants. And that's what this conversation is really about. It's about those moments where you say yes. It's about the opportunities that you can create by being brave sometimes and stepping outside of your comfort zone. My guest today is a former Royal Navy helicopter pilot, a disaster response leader. He's also a sustainability professional and a coach, and someone who has spent the last several years doing what might be the hardest mission of his life, learning to lead himself. He spent time leading within the NHS, and now he's in the British Virgin Islands, and we go deep on what happens when your external competence outpaces your internal world. We also talk about the think, feel, act cycle and why coaching looks forward whereas therapy looks back. And on what a gym, several hurricanes, and a dock in the British Virgin Islands all have in common. This is Charlie Peshard, and this is The Edge of Transformation. Morning, Charlie.
Hi, Andrea. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. So we are recording our second podcast now together, which is very exciting. Bit of an experiment, isn't it? We're both just doing this challenge of podcasting at the same time.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've loved listening to your first couple of episodes on your podcast, The Resilient Edge, spookily similarly titled to mine, which is The Edge of Transformation. So it's obviously clear that we've both got an interesting line of inquiry at the moment, which unites us and brings us, I guess, onto a path, doesn't it, of exploring topics and themes that we're both quite interested in.
Yeah, it's good to have a mechanism to be exploring some of the challenges of being alive today and to be able to discuss that with some incredibly experienced and interesting people.
Yeah, exactly. And it feels to me like we both have a network of cool cats who do interesting things. And I don't know about you, but for me, it was very much just a case of going, like, I feel like I can convene some really interesting people into a room to talk about some very pertinent themes and to unpack various different things that I'm curious about that perhaps I don't necessarily have all the answers to yet. And then instead of just holding that knowledge for myself, I want to share that knowledge with the world, which is why I then thought, well, perhaps podcasting is the right platform for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can completely identify with that approach. I was actually having a chat with somebody yesterday who I really, really respect and admire and have worked with in a couple of different contexts. And they were giving some very kind words, but my comment was exactly the same. You know, getting it on the record feels really valuable. Having the opportunity to share the wisdom of what really is quite a fascinating network, it turns out, that I have.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear further episodes. I guess as we just start to unfold the theme for today's conversation, I just want to acknowledge you, Charlie, for getting up at the crack of dawn this morning on a public holiday in the British Virgin Islands, no less, to talk to me today from sunny South Devon, which is a place, well, Devon generally I know is a place that means a lot to you as well. And so, yes, our lives have interwoven, haven't they, over I don't even know how many years to put to it. Let's say 15, something in that ballpark.
Yeah.
Including, this Caribbean connection. You're over there now and you've got this life in the Caribbean. I'm also an expat from the Cayman Islands. And then likewise, you've got your property down here in Devon where I now live. So take me back to how our paths first crossed. We might have different recollections of this story, but what's your story of how we met? What do you remember?
Yeah, absolutely. It is really interesting how someone you can meet just by absolute chance, really. There can be so similarities and so many touch points in our lives. So my recollection is that we met at a New Year's Eve dinner party somewhere in London. I've no idea where, but through mutual friends. And then I think we went raving the next day at some random place in Islington. That must have been, I don't know, 2012-ish, something like that. But we really kind of got to know each other, I guess, in terms of our values and our interests in the summer of 2013. So I was just on sort of final days of leaving the Navy and trying to work out what my next steps were. And I knew I wanted to do some traveling, and I had some volunteering lined up in Central America, and I was going to attend a Spanish school in Guatemala. And all of that was part of a longer term plan to try to forge a career in disaster response. But I also wanted to relax a bit after 10 and a bit years in the Navy, and try and sort of re-identify myself. I was a helicopter pilot, and that was probably a massive bit of my identity, and probably a bit too much. And so I was looking at trying to shift all of that. And for you, I think you were looking at also what came next. As my recollection goes, we had a bit of spare time on our hands, and we were hanging out quite a lot, and we ended up going to a talk hosted by Escape the City about working overseas, and that gave me a lot of confidence that Central America was the right next step. And I think it's also where you decided to start looking at international social impact programs, and then that consolidated our friendship. And over the next year or two, you were then going strong with Social Starters, and I did some work with you as a consultant.
Yeah, so interesting to hear your memories reflect back, and it prompted me to go, well, actually, I think we met a bit before 2012. It's so funny, isn't it? But you were deployed overseas in the Navy when we first met. And I think you were doing a tour of Afghan. So, I vaguely remember, did I send you a care package? Was that to you, or did I send that to my brother? But you were both in Afghan at the same time, possibly even on the same base. And so there was a bit of a connection there.
Yeah.
Might have been when I was working at the Times and Sunday Times, which I'm going to say might have been 2008 or 9. Ring bells.
So I think, my first tour of Afghanistan was 2010. But yeah, I was there at the same time as Mark. And he was on the Chinook fleet. I was on the Navy Sea King fleet, and we were both at Bastion at the same time in Helmand Province. And I think you did send me a care package, yeah. So we must have met 2009, 2010 then.
Yeah. And then there was a bit of a gap, I think, wasn't there, between you coming out the Navy and us reconnecting. Okay, and was there a specific moment or an idea from our time together hanging out, or from our work together, that then shifted something for you? Do you remember that time in any meaningful way?
Yeah, I think I've sort of been reflecting on our friendship and our relationship over the last few weeks since you kind of came on my podcast. But yeah, I'd say there are a few of these moments actually. So when I was doing that consulting, I was helping you and the team at Social Starters with like basically managing your travel risk. So I think you had your programs in a few different countries like Sri Lanka, India, Brazil, maybe Thailand, maybe Philippines or somewhere. I can't remember. But I remember I was helping you work through like what training was required for the people participating, and then what you would do if there was like a typhoon or an earthquake or a tsunami or a medical emergency or civil unrest. And that made me really realize that I could do this consulting thing. So on a personal professional confidence thing, that was great. And I really enjoyed that work. But I also recognized I wasn't really ready at that point to do my own thing. But that sort of inner confidence that came from that opportunity, I think was one big factor for me. And then working with you a few years later, we were working on a sustainability project that was in Devon, looking at helping small and medium-sized businesses decarbonise their operations. And I think the lead into that, the process of understanding more about sustainability was really interesting. And at a more general and systems level, I think I started to explore more around the ideas of regenerative economics and waste reduction and circular economy, and circular systems rather than like linear extractive models of how humankind interacts with the planet. And so I think that was happening for me around the time. And then that led me during specifically that project with you to understand how significant the motivations are for people to change their practice, and how like primarily that's influenced by economics at the end of the day rather than ideals in most cases. And so I think I really saw in that process, whatever change you're trying to support, you have to meet people where they're at, and you have to have a good level of pragmatism and reality on how fast and how far you can go to help people move to a different state. And I probably knew that already, but that was where that really crystallized for me, and I really saw that really clearly. And then I think finally I'd also just add more generally that I've been really encouraged following your work and the conversations we've had, seeing how people are like genuinely keen to be more conscientious global citizens, and how that can help start to break down some of the financial barriers to participate in more like socio-environmentally friendly practices. So that really feels like the inspirational bit of the work. And that's not me. That's actually just watching you and speaking to you about what's going on. I think the projects that you've got going with both Regeneris and NetShift have been really inspiring, but also very encouraging that there are people out there who want to do some good stuff, because quite often it's easy to get lost in doom scrolling and the news cycle, and these people aren't grabbing the headlines.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, I'm obviously, as you know, very interested in charting the squiggly journey of a career transition, especially when, you're in something as institutional as the Royal Navy, and they do invest, don't they, in military personnel as they transition out. There is some support there. Not everybody's necessarily able to tap into it. And I remember we had lots of chats at the time, didn't we, around like, what are the options for someone with your skill sets? And actually, it's been really inspiring to see that progression and that journey of your career as you've then gone to find your purpose and explore lots of different things, and found yourself, I'm imagining anyway, in certain places that you probably never could have even imagined. So this might be a really nice time to just almost like give us a little bit of a map of the different career points and some of the pivot moments that you've had in a nutshell, just to give those listening a sense of like where you've been, what you've been doing and where you're going to.
Yeah, okay. I grew up in Buckinghamshire, Hertfordshire border, and when I hit 18, went off to university in Manchester to read economics with the intention of going to the city, and quite quickly decided that probably wasn't actually the pathway I wanted to take. And I started to think about maybe joining the Navy, which was a bit of a family tradition. My mum's brother was a helicopter pilot and a Harrier pilot in the Navy, and my granddad, his father, had served as an aircraft engineer for his national service, all based down at Yeovilton, which is where I spent my time when I joined. So I'd sort of been thinking about it, but I also had like massive imposter syndrome about that, and it was only really when I went travelling with my best mate, who's actually the connection between you and me going to that dinner party on that New Year's Eve many years ago, Alex. Me and Alex went travelling after we finished university, and I went with the view of deciding, was my career going to become a lawyer or apply to join the Navy as a helicopter pilot. And Alex went with the view of he wasn't sure what he was going to do. And by the time we came back, he decided he wanted to become a lawyer, and I decided I was definitely applying to join the Navy as a helicopter pilot. And so that happened eventually, and took me, on a wild journey. It was absolutely fantastic. The military is fundamentally a training organisation. They're always preparing you for, the day that you're needed in anger, going war fighting, or hopefully, something less controversial. There were some questionable decisions about the campaigns that were fought, but obviously also a lot of work in disaster response and humanitarian operations, and that was what actually initially attracted me to join the Navy. I was really fortunate. Got to go on exchange to New Zealand, based all over the UK, doing different bits of flying training and ground-based jobs. Worked for NATO a couple of times, running electronic warfare training for them. I went to every NATO country apart from Canada in that job, and that was brilliant. I remember White Sea King helicopters specifically in Kosovo and former Republic of Yugoslavia, and then photos of what at the time would have been Royal Navy Lynxes and occasionally Sea Kings in the Caribbean as well, doing disaster relief work, and that really just interested me from the outset. And so when it came to then leaving the Navy, I'd done 2 tours of Afghanistan. I sustained a neck injury in my second tour. It was more of a chronic condition. Ended up leaving the Navy, and thought, right, well, let's go back and look at this disaster response thing. And so one of the first things that came across to me in that career transition process, and I do think that the military could do better on the career transition. I think that on paper, what they offer is really good. I just don't think it's applied consistently across levers, and you have to be a real self-starter to go and make the most of it, I think, to actually get the most value out of it. I was pretty motivated. I met some incredible people, including a couple of very senior army officers who were retired, but they were general levels. They keep their rank, and they were involved in disaster response, and they were incredibly generous with their information and their time. That was fantastic. And so that made me think, this is something I want to explore more. But I felt I really wanted to go and soften my CV a little bit with some volunteering humanitarian work, which I did in Guatemala initially, and then Belize, and also to learn a language and really give myself an excuse to go traveling. So that was how I ended up in Central America, and then applied for job after job after job after job in the humanitarian space. Wasn't getting any joy at all. It was kind of, if you didn't have 5 years experience in a master's or 10 years direct experience, then it was really hard to get a look in. And coming from the military world as well, there was at that time, and historically, quite a lot of tension between the humanitarian sector and the military. So that was all quite challenging. And so I ended up actually looking more at societal resilience as a whole, and ended up working for a healthcare trust down in Dorset that provided all the community and mental health services, and helping them do their business continuity, crisis and emergency planning. And that was a great job, living down in Bournemouth and working with some really good people. But that was quite a culture shock, coming out of the military into the National Health Service. I dealt with it better than a couple of other veterans that joined around the same time as me, who had very different careers to me. But it was definitely something to get used to. But it gave me again some sort of confidence, and I think it was around then I started doing that consulting with you and Social Starters. I hadn't really left the idea of the disaster response world, but I was like, this is kind of a good place for me to learn more about local UK responses and some of the technical stuff, because it's very collaborative with other organisations who would be part of any sort of disaster, like at the local level. And then in 2016, Team Rubicon UK launched the UK branch of the American organisation. I applied for that as an ops manager and went on board in the summer of 2016, and we were a really small organisation at that stage. Just was part of a really rapid period of transition and growth and shifting and maturing, and I felt I was doing that at the same time as the organisation was. And that took me to the British Virgin Islands in the single biggest change of my life, I would say. And that was 2017, and spent a bit of time in that response, then into the recovery work, then COVID hit, and I went back to the NHS, and then that's where I got kind of really interested in sustainability.
Yeah, okay. And this Team Rubicon piece, for anybody that doesn't know them, are they still around, Team Rubicon? They're very well known.
Yeah, so Team Rubicon was set up by Jake Wood and Will McNulty, two US Marine Corps veterans in the aftermath of the massive earthquake in Haiti in 2010. And they just found a way to directly repurpose their military skills in a civilian context, and they did some great work in Haiti, and that encouraged them to then start Team Rubicon in the US. They launched in various allied countries: Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. And the UK version isn't still going in the same guise. It's separated out during COVID, and is now React Disaster Response, doing the same kind of stuff, but with so a lot of international work, but also they've got a much strengthened UK focus as well. And I think that was something that we really struggled with in my time, because we didn't have loads of disasters locally, but the whole premise behind it is taking primarily military veterans and repurposing those skills for disaster response. And the US has loads of disasters. It's quite easy to do that. The UK doesn't so much. So we were more focused internationally.
Yeah, I remember this being a field that I had no experience in whatsoever. Sure, I'd travelled around some harder to reach countries in the world and had some adventures, gotten off the beaten track, and considered myself a fairly exposed person, including to natural disasters. And I'd lived through a hurricane when I was in the Cayman Islands. As many people know, I lived through the 2004 tsunami as well when I was in Thailand. But you taught me so much about disaster management and planning and creating security and evacuation protocols that prior to that, we'd been running our programs for social starters in these developing countries that we were in these emerging markets, and didn't have any of these plans in place. And then you did this brilliant piece of work for us in the 3 territories that we were in at the time, probably some planning. I think Thailand and the Philippines, we were thinking about going there. So you're probably helping us map the terrain. And then lo and behold, tsunami warning goes off in Sri Lanka when I'm there, and I've got a cohort there, and we had to put your protocols into place. And I had to sound the alarm, essentially. And it was incredibly triggering for me, having lived through, the world's greatest natural disaster of certainly the last few hundred years. But I was so thankful for having had those procedures in place. Like, you couldn't believe it. Thankfully, the earthquake that went off didn't result in a tsunami, and everybody was fine. And it was a huge relief. But it really opened my eyes to just a completely different way to map, I suppose, continuity and to do planning, particularly around like risk and resilience and keeping people safe, which for me now, fast forward all of these years, like safety, probably more psychological safety, it is such a theme for me. I'm really understanding it in a way that I never did before, and it means everything. I'm curious to know then, from when you went to the BVI with Team Rubicon, which was in response to Hurricane Irma, what did you walk into? What was it like? Was it a genuine disaster zone, would you say? And what did you discover from the people there then that just taught you something that most people would never be able to grasp, having never been exposed to that kind of a threat?
Yes, it was 2017, September the 6th into the 7th, the Hurricane Irma came through the Eastern Caribbean, and it was at the time the biggest Category 5, so the strongest type of hurricane to have made landfall. And that record's been broken several times in the years since, and it was a crazy period of time in terms of the weather. So we had at Team Rubicon UK, we had a response lined up to go and assist our colleagues in the States, in Texas, after Hurricane Harvey, which had made landfall and caused all kinds of devastation in Texas. And like the names of the hurricanes are alphabetically generated. So that's H Harvey, And then the next one was Irma. Then we had Jose with a J. Then we had Kate. Then we had Lee. Then we had Maria. And they were all kicking around the Eastern Caribbean. And so we were prepping for that Harvey response. And then we said, oh, hang on a second. This Irma hurricane looks like that's going to be a lot of trouble and probably in more vulnerable part of the world than Texas. So we started looking at shifting our approach to going to somewhere in the Caribbean. Man, it was crazy. We were just trying to get as many people together as we could. We actually had my my mum's funeral the day of Irma, and I remember doing a reading in the church. And then at the wake, I was basically just on the phone, just trying to mobilise volunteers. We had about, 10 paid staff across all the functions in the organisation, and then loads of volunteers. And that was like the lifeblood of the organisation, just trying to get this team together. And so we ended up with 2 teams deploying initially. One with my colleague Dan went to Barbados, so he came in the southeast of the Caribbean. I took a team to New York, so we'd be in a position to like go wherever we needed to, but from the other side, we knew there was going to be issues with access. And so I went to Haiti first because we'd done a lot of work in Haiti. It's very vulnerable. And one of the UN disaster coordination teams was going to Haiti, which is always a good indicator that we were making a decent decision. So we went there. Dan was in Barbados trying to make his way up the island chain. To Antigua and Barbuda. Barbuda was a lot on the news at the time. It was absolutely flattened. We were in Haiti. It became quite obvious quite quickly that Haiti wasn't in need from the hurricane. It was, obviously it had its ongoing challenges, but the hurricane itself hadn't done that much damage. So Turks and Caicos Islands became the next target. And I think this is something that people don't necessarily realise, like how imprecise some of this work is. Like your best guess as to where you're going to be most effective, and until you get on the ground, you just don't know. There was an expression in the military: "Time spent on recce is never wasted," and it's absolutely true. Like anything you can see with your own eyes is always valuable. So we got up to Turks and Caicos and got the team settled there, and there was work to do, but there was a lot of response happening. There were like Commando Royal Engineers there from the UK. The Canadians had sent a ship. They had helicopters. Lots happening. A slightly confused coordination picture in terms of how the response was coming together. But by then, Dan and some other teams had got into from Antigua to the British Virgin Islands, and the message was coming out from there that was the most affected. So I got sent there to go and run the Caribbean response from the BVI initially was the plan. So I was the first and only person to arrive on the first commercial flight into the BVI. And it was one of those where the wheels didn't really stop. Like the door went down with the steps. I was like kicked off 6:30 in the evening. They had no interest, that crew, in getting stuck overnight. And Hurricane Maria was on its way by then as well. So the others, Lee and Jose, had gone up. They turned north and gone and battered the east coast of the States. But Maria was still on its way towards the BVI. So the crew didn't want to get stuck. So I just wandered into the airport terminal, which was, roof ripped off, seating everywhere, Royal Marines and British Army people everywhere. No immigration, no customs, just strolled in. And it was a curfew, so my team couldn't come and collect me. So I hitched a ride in the back of a telecoms truck. And as we came out of the airport, I was like, well, I thought that terminal was in a bad state, but the country was just devastated. So in terms of, we had like the tower at the airport was like mashed up, the light aircraft overturned everywhere, power lines were down, cars upside down, shipping containers littered across. They'd just been picked up by the winds and thrown around. Boats flipped upside down, trees down or stripped bare, roofs missing, windows and walls of buildings destroyed. And it was definitely, without doubt, within seconds, evident to me that this was the worst affected location I'd ever been to in disaster response. And, you know, in terms of like the thing that people don't recognise, I mean, a disaster zone, by its very nature, it means that the local capacity has been overwhelmed. That is what makes it a disaster. And there are two factors within that. So there can be the environmental element, but there can also be like the social element. So environmentally, there's just the raw power and scale of nature and how destructive that can be. And that can be extremely humbling and even overwhelming at times. And then there's the impact of that power on the human environment, so taking out the utilities and the infrastructure. But there are also some big differences on location. So if you're in the UK and there was a big disaster, generally that big disaster is regionally confined, and so you've got a lot of other resources you can call upon to come and help you. If you have a emergency in London, you can get home counties police or ambulances or whatever to come and help with that. Or the same is true around the UK. Whereas in the BVI, the whole place was affected. All the emergency services were affected. The ambulances destroyed. The fire station was destroyed. All of those people's homes have been affected. Their families have been affected. So it's much harder to affect some level of response and recovery when everyone is part of the thing that's caused the problem. And so that was pretty unique in my experience to the BVI. In terms of, you know, what that then looks like and how that comes out, there's the chaos is just reflected in everything. So communication becomes absolutely essential. Coordination is not always there, you know, and there's never enough resources. So you're always like chasing the curve. The information is always imperfect. When everything's affected, everything becomes a challenge. And so that makes life hard pretty quickly. But that then brings me to the human element of this. And so generally, and the BVI was absolutely a great example of this, there is a sense of togetherness and community that isn't always there in the absence of such a harrowing event. But there is like clarity of purpose and things become quite simple quite quickly. Like the objective number one is to survive, and there is some level of purity and elegance in that equation to my mind. And I found that people really tend to pull together. And this, you know, this is not exclusive to the BVIs as any disaster. And they pull together to get through that initial response and relief phase. But when there is assistance from the outside, that's generally really well appreciated. And I have, without doubt, seen that bring an extra level of hope to those affected, because they realise and believe that they matter. You know, someone has come from halfway across the world, a stranger has come from halfway across the world to help. And that really helps people's mental state and mental resilience. And I also think it helps restore hope in humanity. Governments and institutions aren't always so keen on that assistance, and I've very much had like mixed experiences with that, where the politics can get in the way of the best possible response. But at a human to human level, it's inspiring and it's humbling, and it's a very powerful experience. And I think that's something that I've been able to take into other work, just that seeing the best in people and trusting that ultimately, whilst people might be distracted by some of the frivolities of modern life, fundamentally, when it comes down to it, people are going to put their hand up and get stuck in and try and create a better position for themselves and for others.
I mean, that was such a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing. It reminded me of so many things, particularly in the way that I'm framing this idea of like meeting our edges and what the edges of transformation look like. You know, I'm really interested in this idea of the macro and then the community layer, which, you know, is sometimes called the meso layer. I learned this during my economics masters. And then there's the micro layer, which I'm seeing as like the inner work, the piece that we do on ourselves, like how we show up. Then there's the community and you know, and then the broader picture and the broader system. And they're nested holes, and we all sit within each other like Russian dolls, don't we? All of these things. And how we show up for ourselves then also impacts how we show up in the community, and how the community show up impacts how the larger, broader system performs as well. And I'm just wondering, when you're dropped into what must be like the biggest the biggest edge for everybody, the fear zone. This isn't just about a testing scenario, is it? Where you go like, oh, this is a bit challenging. This is like absolute chaos. Did it feel like a sense of absolute chaos when you were dropped into it? Or was there feelings of like, actually, people know what they're doing here? And did it feel safe? And did you encounter people who were really struggling in the unsafety that might have been for them? What was that like, that human and organisational element, I suppose?
Yeah, this is a really interesting point, and I think I just want to support and highlight that assertion that you're making in terms of whatever entity you're talking about. Fundamentally, that is made up of individuals. So if the individuals are not in the right place, or they haven't got the right skills or the right experience or the right mindset, and right mindset, I really mean like a helpful and relevant mindset to the problem, things do start falling down quite quickly. And this is where I think the nature of resilience becomes really interesting. And I think on a human level, fundamentally stripped back to everything, it's about survivability. But in terms of the safety piece, I mean, we had, as I said, we just had my grandmother's funeral a few days before.
Right.
And I think that didn't affect me initially, but I was deployed for 7 weeks, I think, and that is 3.5 times long as what our standard would have been at the time, but the circumstances sort of dictated that. And I was very happy to be doing that, but it definitely meant that I felt quite a lot of fatigue towards the end of that deployment. And in terms of then the safety and the psychological safety for people, we had 2 distinct groups of volunteers that came out for us in that response. And specifically that response, we had really well-known, well-trained, well-experienced volunteers who had been in and around the organisation for at least months, had come through our training programme, and some had been there for several years. We had some really trusted people. And then we'd sort of done a bit of a broader appeal to see if anyone else wanted to come. And so we put quite a few people we didn't know very well on a plane. So I was having to balance those 2 different groups of people. I was then having to balance the fact that some parts of government weren't that keen that we were there, whereas some were. And actually, when I had a very big cohort of just under 40 people sent to me in one go. And when they arrived in the BVI, we had no accommodation, no transport, no food, no water for them, no jobs for them, because the whole government had been distracted. Well, not distracted. They'd been rightly focused on Hurricane Maria, but they'd not been able to keep going on that, and also the recovery and the response to Irma. So everything sort of just stopped for a few days, which is when I got there. And then the team that were running it were leaving, and that handover was a bit disjointed. So there was a lot of uncertainty around that. And I was there trying to create some stability for that team that were coming in saying, hey, right, we do want you here. We're glad you're here, but just need to work through a few bits and pieces. And certainly some of those people were not happy with where we ended up putting them from a sleeping perspective. Some of them weren't happy with some of the work they did, but it was generally the new people who hadn't ever been in a disaster response situation before. And I don't think they were mentally ready for the level of sacrifice potentially they were going to have to make as part of that. So, living in austere conditions, not becoming a burden on the local population and supply chain. And we ended up having to do a bit of a reset with the team to try and remanage the challenges. Now, I will also say that team did some awesome work. Once we'd sorted out with the government what needed to be done, oh my goodness, they were incredible. Like they did such great work. And that was, it's a very vulnerable reflection now, but that value of that work from that particular cohort of volunteers was something that I really didn't focus on for quite a few years, because I found the whole experience quite challenging, and I really questioned my leadership and my ability to take a team of people in a direction. And I think that was because I hadn't resourced myself very well with who was there. And I could have done better, but yeah.
I'm drawing some parallels, but even though it's a different climate and a completely different challenge and context, when we used to take volunteers and deploy them to Kenya, Sri Lanka, Brazil, India, there was always a period of like bedding in the beginning, where there's culture shock, it's all unfamiliar. Some people would completely freak out, but they wouldn't be able to communicate that because of shame, say. But then it would find a way to seep out, and people would develop like almost slightly toxic behaviors that were perhaps tribal and ways of like trying to connect, and feel then safe somehow in some familiarity, like, you know, forming little cliques and then, you know, slugging off the organization and blaming everything on the cockroaches or the heat, or, you know, like then it's our fault because they even had these experiences in the first place. And then, you know, that would then present a number of different challenges that we would have to, you know, I guess, level out somehow. So I can't even begin to imagine when you've got 40 volunteers who are in an unfamiliar environment and, you know, everything's very emergent and there isn't necessarily a plan and people haven't had the training like that. From a leadership perspective for you, sure, maybe you're saying you're a little under-resourced and you'd come from a family funeral, and like those things are also very human and really challenging. But I'm just wondering, like, who on earth would have been able to cope with that scenario, you know? And like, was there ever a feeling in you where you're like, almost like, fuck this shit, this is a bit intense, I didn't sign up for this? Or are you somebody that hits your stride in those moments and perhaps your military training kicks in? Like, do you thrive under that level of pressure when you can feel everybody's energies not quite in a good place? You know, how do you respond in that moment? Like, I know I might go like, fuck this, and I want to run away. And I might come back 2 minutes later, but I definitely hit a wall under moments of pressure. What do you do?
I think as a general rule, I would say that I respond well in crisis. I think I'm generally very good at staying calm, recognise it. And I'll put this down to, there's possibly something natural in me, but very much the training that I got from the Navy and going through flying training, like not like feeling an emotional response coming to something and then regulating that and working through it. And I'm really good at in professional life feeling that surge of something welling up inside me and saying, right, I know what that is. I'm not going to let that drive my actions. I'm going to just have that second to accept it and acknowledge it, and then get on with what I genuinely think is the best rational decision, not maybe the emotional decision. And so I do think that is something that I am good at, and I think that it's served me extremely well in professional and also some personal circumstances. But I also would say that particular scenario, the political context was requiring a lot of my energy to keep us not getting kicked out of the country, keep us productive and useful, and trying to manage different priorities that the government had, and how we could best support those whilst also turning down some requests that were just not appropriate for us to be doing, the nature of our deployment, versus trying to keep a load of volunteers motivated and engaged, some of whom didn't get it basically. And I didn't really have, I don't know if I didn't have the time or I didn't take the time or I didn't have the mental energy or what to be able to do that. I think I did appoint a few people to do some leadership stuff who I knew and trusted, and they did what they could do really, really well. But there were some things going on that fundamentally that became a staff member problem. It was not a volunteer leader problem. And so that was the other thing. I think, like, you end up, when you've got that different gradient, like, and this will be the same for you, right? The person that's running it, that's paid to run it, is the problem holder, and you are the one that's going to get, looked to try and solve everything. And that the challenge came from everywhere. There was like a really intense week, I think. And I was very happy when that big deployment sort of ended and we went back to our more standard model of a couple of small 5-6 person teams, and right. People that we knew a bit better were able to come in for the third wave of volunteers. But like I say, I mean, I drive past I live in the BVI now. I met the lady who's now my wife, Lauren, as part of that response. We work together, and every day I drive past the school that our team was based in at that time, and it's I think that's the other unusual thing about this. Most people come to a disaster zone, they do their bit and they leave. They don't stay and see all these reminders and oh, that building's finally finished 9 years later, or that one's got another problem now, or oh yeah, that's where X happened or Y happened. I was at this is a side, this is absolute side, but like I go over to one of the other islands at least once a week with my current role, and there on that dock is where some of my volunteers said, "What's going on with you and Lauren?" And nothing was going on with me and Lauren, but they just obviously saw a chemistry that I hadn't even seen because I was like in the zone, if you like. And I actually sent her a photo the other day. I was like, "Oh, this dock always reminds me of like when I found out that maybe something was going to happen between us." But I've never sent her that photo before, and I never expressed that thought of every time I get off the dock. But it's it's just funny. I think I've been more reflective knowing that I was coming on this probably. So yeah.
Oh, that's a sweet memory. Yeah. And I think what's coming through for me next is like we in the leadership development space frequently talk about meeting our edges. That's where the real growth happens. Like if we can lean in on the thing that feels the most uncomfortable, we will push that supposed glass ceiling that we've created for ourselves about what we're capable of. And I think you can look at a disaster zone as like an epitome of going into the fear zone or going into a war or conflict situation. That is really visceral, isn't it? You can really see how that's like a really scary thing to go and do. And then there are lots of other things in our lives that are just as scary, depending on our own experience in life, and the things that have shaped us and our environments and experiences. And I know that, those nested holes play in here. It might not be that, Charlie, you want to go to another war or another disaster zone to meet your edges. But I know that you frequently do meet other edges of all sorts of different levels. And you've been through studies recently. You've become a coach. You're continuously in this process of self-improvement and professional development. So what's the current edge that you're looking to meet next?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. My big thing at the moment is getting at peace with myself and the world. I think that he's talking about things that I probably wouldn't want to do again or at the moment, based on my past. And I think that elements of that Irma experience really made me question a lot about what I couldn't do. And I think it's healthy to understand what you can't do, but I think it can also be quite paralyzing if that's all you're focusing on and take a bit of a perfectionist approach to it. And so I would say I actively avoided human leadership roles for quite a few years after the Irma deployment. I had maybe have a couple of people in a team that I'm managing, but I'm not like leading them. And I might have had leadership roles in terms of advocating for stuff and developing people, but I wasn't line managing or directly leading a team. And in the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, that has now changed, and I've got a team of 30 odd people under me now. And I think that it took me a really long time to work out what it was that had left me so uncomfortable. And so much of it is my internal narrative, my internal monologue, rather than anything external or objective. And so and then the coaching, the training I did to get my coaching qualification came off the back of, I've done some time with therapists. I've had a coach myself. I found both of those processes useful, but extremely different. I've also been really fortunate to have a couple of people in my life that I would say have been able to mentor me to a certain degree. And so looking at that development, being very deliberate about that development, I think has been really helpful. But the single biggest thing for me now is just looking at how I emotionally respond to things. And I don't mean flying into a rage or you're having an extreme response. It's just noticing and being curious about, oh, right, that has made me, I'm thinking about this, that's making me feel a certain way. Mm-hmm. And now I'm doing an action on the back of that. This think, feel, act cycle is super interesting to me. And I've always had this really distant fascination with Eastern philosophy, and I've spent a lot of time between leaving university and joining the Navy, spent a lot of time in the Himalayas and Southeast Asia, and so that's kind of like Buddhism model's always been really interesting to me, but I've never felt committed to it. But I've started doing a lot more since I did the coaching course. I've found myself drawn a lot more to that, and how much of what we think, feel and believe to be true is subjective, and actually you can control your thoughts. I'm just also going to maybe give a shout out to there's a freestyle skier, Eileen Gu, who is, if you have not seen her or heard of her, that we go and watch the skiing. The skiing's amazing, but go and watch her speaking. She is one of the most just inspirational people I've ever seen talking, in terms of how she manages the pressures and the mindset to become one of the best skiers in history, and why she does it and how she's chosen her approach. I mean, you do so much work around purpose, and this is a lady who's she's Chinese, American born Chinese, and she chose to compete in the Olympics for China because she wanted to bring positive female role models and skiing to an Asian audience to increase participation and encourage little girls to feel confident that with the right mindset they can do anything. She was like, the American population don't need this. I'm really interested in bringing this to Asia. And I think that's such a fascinating mindset. Like that is purpose, right? People aren't necessarily choosing that, saying what's the easiest thing for me, where are it going to be better to get a big sponsorship company, where's my big paycheck coming from? Actually saying, no, my primary legacy here is growing the sport that I love and being a positive role model for people that aren't necessarily getting that. And I think that's super fascinating. So yeah, my mindset is where my real focus is at the moment, and trying to find an inner calm and confidence that doesn't necessarily come with the big shoutiness and big hand of pointing that the military would have interpreted as confidence way back when.
Oh, do you know, there's so much what you just said that was rich for me, and I want to speak to a little bit of it just before we close, maybe just as a closing thing, which is that, you can go out into the world and do all these really big things, can't you? People climb mountains, they become Olympian skiers, people can go to the top of their game. But for the majority of people, that might just not be a reality for them. It doesn't mean that they can't achieve greatness in the way that is just beyond what their limiting beliefs are saying that they can achieve. Either way, it doesn't really matter whether you're going to climb Everest, or get to the top of your game in a sport. Whatever you're doing, it is that mindset piece, isn't it? And I think that it's so easy for us to have an immediate quick flash of a reaction. No, that's not for me. No, that feels terrifying. No, like I'm feeling anger. I can't hear what you're telling me. This feels like a judgment or a criticism. And then having some kind of response to that can mean we destroy our relationships, for example. And I love, because I know you so well, I love then that this journey for you has been about doing that inner work, going on the inner quest and finding the calm. Is there a tip you would give to anybody listening who might have a feeling in them that's quite reactive as a first port of call that then becomes an engulfment, and it's hard for them to step out of that and be curious about either themselves or the person that's sharing something with them that might be causing that in the first place? What would you say to that person?
I think if you are committed to not enjoying that and wanting to change it, I think that's the first thing. You've got to want to change it. But if you are wanting to change that and find a way of approaching this differently and becoming curious, then I think try and find the energy in a moment where you're not in that emotional reaction to start to record when it's happening and what's happening, and just start to take an interest in it and notice it. Everyone is a work in progress, right? I don't believe that anyone is a finished article. This is a mistake that I used to make. I thought that, I'm 47 now, I used to think in my late teens and early 20s there would come this point in my life where I was fixed as to who I was, and I'd be happy and satisfied and content and presumably have some stuff. I didn't really know what. I was never really materially motivated, but presumably I'd have some stuff. I'd have a career, and it would all be very static once I hit something like 40. And I've absolutely recognised that's not true. And in the world that we're living in, things are changing very quickly. There's also a lot of hype about things changing that isn't happening, but there's a lot of stuff that is changing, and you've got to try to change with that and grow, but know what it is that you need to respond to? What stimuli are you responding to, and what do you need to not respond to? And I think that that's true on an individual level, in relationships, around the house, around work, but also your relationship with the world around you. And a lot of people very frustrated at the moment, very angry, and I can see why. I think there's a lot to be angry about. I don't necessarily agree with everybody's anger, and they probably won't agree with what I'm frustrated about. Fundamentally, understand what is giving you an emotional response to something, and then believing that you can change that if you want to is essential. I'm a big fan of Peter Crone's work, and he talks about life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you are not free. And that resonated with me so much. I was like, yeah, this is all just giving me practice at becoming the human I want to be by not having the response that my inner chimp is desperate to have.
It is the inner chimp, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, you know, I've started to notice this myself and adopt this idea, really, that is that if I'm getting an adverse reaction to something, i.e. annoyed of another person because I don't like the way that they are responding or the way that they're talking or the things that they're saying to me, it's not actually about that. It's about, like, the reason why I'm getting an adverse reaction is because it must be reflecting something back to me about myself that maybe I haven't accepted within myself, or I haven't forgiven myself for yet, or I have harsh judgments on myself for that thing. So then I'm projecting it onto the other. And it's not obvious every single time exactly that that's what it is. And sometimes I know I have some resistance to it, but I trust that there's some juice in there. There's some usefulness to sit with it and just inquire, okay, why did that bother me? What does it tell me about myself? And that has been such an eye-opening process. And in that, I feel like my judgment is shedding away, my compassion is increasing. And it's just giving me a tool, really, to sit and learn more about myself.
Yeah, there's two things I just want to come in on there and potentially add. So I think the first one is that, the coaching approach is that, and I think people don't understand what coaching is. Coaching is very specifically creating the environment for other people to come up with their own solutions to their own challenges and indeed set their goals themselves, but facilitating with what we call powerful questions. And then the second element of it is believing or knowing that everyone's doing the best they can, and your best might not be what I would like my best to look like, but that is irrelevant. I'm gonna again, it's back to meeting you where you are. I'm gonna see where you're showing up, and I'm going to just take that as the reality. I'm not going to project what I would like. I'm not going to project how I would feel if I was you. None of that is happening. Just going to be very open, and this is all quite related to a growth mindset of again being open and curious and trying to learn as we go along. So, but I think that those are the core elements of the coaching that I'm now taking into my life, and I'm trying to absolutely apply that to me. So I've started being a lot more generous with other people, but I've also started being a lot more generous with myself and trying to say exactly like you've described there, what's going on. And I think the other element, the final element for me is, coaching does not ask why. I've done therapy, I've done coaching. Therapy is why and looks at the past, whereas coaching is what and how and when and looks at the future. And I think I spent a lot of my life waiting for this magic thing to come along to fix my relationship with my past, whereas actually only I can fix my relationship with my past. And quite often that is best done by putting energy into a designed future. And I think that's been really interesting for me to go through that process. I've not nailed this. I don't know if I ever will, but it's something that is a clear aspiration and something that I feel is worth putting energy and attention towards. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in this to find a way to do the same, whether it's by yourself or whether it's with a coach. Or just a friend, a supportive friend, or someone you admire. I think there's a lot of resource out there to be able to help people go on that journey, and it's definitely made me feel emotionally much more at peace.
And in some ways, finding peace, it seems to me like that is that has been my purpose. When I look back to my younger years, and there was probably a lot more inner turbulence going on, finding my peace and the tools and the resources and the right people around me then helps to harmonize and stabilize that. But it's definitely not a linear journey. It's very squiggly because new people come in, don't they? And then they've got their own things that they need to work on, and that can shift dynamics and create new things that you haven't seen come up, whether that's in the workplace or your personal relationships, your family. It's never ending, isn't it? It doesn't ever seem to stop. And as we raise our glass ceilings of what we're capable of, we put ourselves into new spaces and places as well that create new edges. I think what I'm trying to say is that transformation is a transition process. We are always in transition. If we believe in growth as a value, not everybody does, and that's also okay. I had this conversation with my client last week, when the participants of a cohort that we've been managing on a leadership development program, where we put them in quite hairy environments to take on these assignments so that they can get to that edge. They can be tested and see where their edges are. We were then talking about how do we encourage them to get back into the comfort zone? Because sometimes actually you then have to create the conditions for comfort so that you can just do a bit of self-soothing and familiarity and then regroup. And I think that's an important message for life, isn't it? You don't want to always be in the fear zone because yes, that will test you, but you've got to sometimes bring it back to home and safety and having those conditions around you to regroup with yourself and recalibrate. That's ultimately what we're saying, wasn't it? About it's gone out of my head when you've when you're dysregulated and you re-regulate.
Yes.
It's all about re-regulation.
Indeed. And I think that this is something you can train. It's like a muscle. You can practice this and it gets better. I remember having a conversation with you a couple of years ago, probably. We were in like mine and Lauren's house in Tavistock. You came over to visit and we were talking about going to the gym. And one of the things that I remember saying there, and I only remember saying it because you said it back to me a couple of weeks later, but I've always struggled a bit with going to the gym. I will really surprise quite a few people that know me, I think, because I'm I probably look reasonably consistent over 25 years, but there are periods where I'll go 5-6 times a week and I'll do that for several months. And then I'll really struggle to go for a few months. And what I started doing was realizing that actually trying to stay in shape is absolutely part of my identity. It is who I am. And I need to trust that. And so when I'm having one of these, I'm not going to the gym at the moment phases, knowing that I am eventually going to go back to the gym. So why not just start going back to the gym? I'm not changing who I am by not going to the gym. So just get back on the horse quicker. And I use that now in all kinds of different ways, whether it's food or, how I'm approaching something at work or relationship, just saying, right, where do I want to be? Can I be there? Yes, because I've been there before. So all I need to do is speed up the cycle to get back to where I want to be and not go into a big, long, low lull and just say, well, hang on, I know I can do this. I know I'm going to do this. So let's go and do it. And
that stayed with me as well.
Really helpful.
I never forgot that conversation because I think I just started embarking into training myself, hadn't I? I've never been a gym person, always was very vocal about the fact that I find gyms boring. And so I was learning how to weight train properly and I really got into it. But I've noticed over the last 2.5 years since then, if that's when it was, I've had exactly those same cycles that you've just described, like obsessive, compulsive, hyper focus, trying to go as many times as I can in the week. Almost going in my mind, I'm going every day because I know there'll be a couple of days when I don't. And then I'll do that consistently for a period of time. It's never very long, maybe a month. And then it will drop off and go the complete opposite way. And then it's the cycle of trying to get back on the horse. And I always just remembered, I have to tell myself, I'm a person that needs to work out. I'm a person that needs to go to the gym and have fitness in my life. And I just need to do that and prioritize that and move things around to make that possible for me. I now have a gym in my garden. I notice you've got a home gym too.
Yeah.
And it's reducing the barriers to entry, isn't it? If you can do that, once you've recognized something's a priority, it's life-changing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely what I need. We used to live a 2-minute walk from a gym and then we've moved to somewhere that is a 20-minute. or 15-minute drive there and back to the gym. And we were both like, we've got a young daughter. We're like, we're not going to go to the gym if we don't have access to the gym at home. So we just did the decision-making process. Like, how much does a gym cost membership-wise? How much time is that? And how much is it going to cost to ship something in? And we were like, well, we're going to get our money back in about 7 months. So done. And sure enough, we're really good at using the gym. And it is just being consistent. I think, like, people used to talk about, well, people do talk about motivation. And then I came across, I can't remember who it was. I'm pretty sure it was a former Royal Marine who's now got like a bit of a public profile with Foxy or Aldo Kane or someone. They were talking about, it's motivation is not the problem generally for people, it's discipline. And that was a huge shift in my understanding. And that's only been in my mid to late 40s. Like, yeah, you can be as motivated as you like, but if you're not disciplined about that motivation, you're just going to sit there going, I really want to be something one day, but you're never going to get there. You've got to be showing up even when you don't feel like it. And I think that's back to that think, feel, act cycle again. And it doesn't matter what you're thinking, how you're feeling. It's how you act that fundamentally defines how people are going to see you and how you're going to appear in others' lives. So action becomes the key to all of that. And again, coaching, future-based, not past-based. So we all understand why, probably, we all understand elements of why we find something hard or why we choose to do something that's not helpful to us. Whereas actually the power is within us. We just have to find a way to harness it and something that resonates to be positive and do things that are, however you value this word, good or beneficial. So yeah, it's really interesting one. And I think the growth mindset that sits underneath all of this is so fascinating. And just that willingness to risk failure, but to know that you're going to find a way to learn and move forward from it is essential.
Yeah. It links into the discipline. It links into how we change ourselves, get rid of all of those old habits that we formed over the years where we lean more into, say, resistance than commitment, and let resistance be the thing that pulls us in directions. But usually they are directions away from things that are productive for us or would make us happier or have healthier relationships. So, Charlie, well, this has been a fascinating conversation. There's so much more that we could say. There's probably needing to be a part 2 at some point.
I'd love that. Yeah, let's do it.
For anyone that's listening, curious about coaching or Charlie's work, Charlie, how can they find you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, Charlie Peshard on LinkedIn. I'm the only one there. Or visit my website, theresilientedge.com. And I've also got a podcast, as you mentioned, which is The Resilient Edge. And that's on all the main streaming platforms. You can also link to it via my website.
Yeah, go check it out. I would encourage everyone to go listen.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.